Yo, what's up, Hivers? If you can hear a little background noise, I apologize. The neighbors are doing some construction and really have no control over it. And I like to record these a little early so I have time to do a little extra dive on the bands and the tunes, get a little extra information, some extra facts to write about. I'm going to include a little bonus, some extra bonus information in text below my ThreeTuneTuesday and 90s Friday post. So, I know some people don't have time to listen to the vlog, so I'm just going to, spend a few minutes grabbing some extra information, put it below the bottom of the post in case anyone would rather just skim and read it. But okay, so I brought you the SoCal 80s punk scene for like 3 weeks. Then last week, I brought you the DC punk scene covering bands like Dag Nasty, Fugazi, and before that, again, bands like Social Distortion, Descendants, Dead Kennedys, Fear. I brought you 10 bands from the California 80s punk scene. So kind of sticking with the same vibe. I'm keeping it 80s punk. Yeah, one of the picks is a little more alternative. But I think a lot of people that are fans, they toured with punk bands, even though they were a little different. But I'm bringing you, with the bonus jam, 4 picks from 4 different areas. I'm bringing you Social Distortion again, but a different song than when we covered them in the SoCal ThreeTuneTuesday post about a month ago. I think I brought you the song, what the hell was it called? But anyway, the first pick is a Chicago band. Now, Chicago didn't really have much of a punk scene in the sense that, I don't have enough Chicago punk bands to do a whole post about Chicago punk. I mean, I'm sure they exist, but there weren't a lot of big bands that kind of, years later are looked back at. You talk about Southern California, you could name 10 bands that are legendary, that everybody knows, even the people that listen to 90s punk and arrived a little late to the scene are going to know, the song Amoeba from the Adolescents, Agent Orange, a little less known, but most people have probably heard of them from Orange County. The DC scene, a lot of people know. New York in the 80s, really, punk was kind of dead. Punk in New York City you had the Ramones, you had the Dead Boys in the 70s. And then in New York City, it basically turned into like a hardcore scene. It was very different than what was going on in California and elsewhere. But Chicago, it's really Naked Raygun's the only band that I ever hear anybody talk about. And I think it's because Steve Albini, the famed producer, he passed away earlier this year, of, In Utero by Nirvana fame, Surfer Rosa by the Pixies fame, the second Bush album in 96, Razorblade Suitcase. Basically an indie producer. The band I covered for 90s Friday, Failure, he produced their first album. And, basically, I think they're mostly known because of his fame as a producer, and he was the drummer. So just not a lot of bands that I'm sure there were local bands, but not a lot of bands that, looking back, people are like, oh yeah, the Chicago scene had this band, that band. It's just not really the case. So I'm picking Naked Raygun. They started putting out records in 83. I'm picking their 1989 album because I love the song Treason, the opening track. It's a very unique, kind of slower song, and then the chorus speeds up. So for Chicago, we're picking the band Naked Raygun. The song is Treason, and that's from their 1989 record. The band broke up shortly after that and or went on hiatus. And yeah, that's my pick for Chicago. Moving on to New York, we're going with the Cro-Mags. Now, this is just a totally different kind of punk. It's really considered hardcore. The New York scene just I guess because punk kind of exploded there in the mid 70s, it just kind of moved on to something different. I'm going with the song Hard Times by the Cro-Mags. I believe that's 1986. Let me double check that. And again, just a very, very, very different thing. Let me look it up here. Cro-Mags. Yeah, the album is The Age of Quarrel, 1986. Huge nuclear bomb going off on the album cover. Hard Times is just a song that I like. I listened to the lead singer on a couple podcasts a couple years ago and, gave the record a chance. And that's really about it. Just a very different vibe. New York was just doing its own thing, and Cali really is where that kind of melodic punk, thrived. And, you had a band like you had a band like Dag Nasty in DC who sounded more like a SoCal band. I think Naked Raygun was very original and just kind of doing their own thing. But yeah, New York was just kind of a different thing. It was like a hardcore scene, that maybe resembled DC a little bit, but it was just a different thing. And when you hear the track, you'll definitely understand, why a lot of people would kind of label it as hardcore, not really punk. And then we got a returning guest, Social Distortion, for pick number 3 to represent the California punk scene for this post. I picked the song Telling Them when I covered them about a month ago. But this song is from the same record, 1983's Mommy's Little Monster. I'm going to pick the song Another State of Mind. Again, just a great... I could have put the Descendants on here. I could have put a couple other bands. I just figured since I covered this album and I did not include this song, which I think is, a classic early 80s, mid 80s punk song, I figured Social Distortion was a good band to kind of rep California for the post. And again, that's Mommy's Little Monster, the 1983 record. The song Another State of Mind. And so that's the 3 picks. So for bonus jam, I'm trying to think, all right, what else is there? I already covered DC, and there's not a lot to pick from. So where else can I go? And then I'm like, oh, Hüsker Dü. They're from Minnesota. So I picked Hüsker Dü. More of an alternative band than a punk band. I think really they're a band that would have been big in the early 90s if they had come a little later. I'm picking the song Something I Learned Today from their 84 album. Was that on an indie label? I believe it was. Zen Arcade? Yes, that's on Zen Arcade. That's right before they moved to a major label. This was on SST Records, which is basically a punk label. But again, they're kind of, I would say, more the beginning of alternative rock. They put out an album basically every year in the mid-'80s. And if they had slowed it down and, leaned more toward 90, 92, I think they would have probably been more labeled with like that alternative 90s rock kind of vibe. But they just put out, a ton of music in a very short period of time. They split up after 88. And if they hadn't, I think they would have been a lot bigger. But they're a band that a lot of alternative 90s bands reference as an influence. And even though they're not technically punk, they were kind of on a punk label. They toured with a lot of punk bands. And I thought it'd be a cool bonus tune to kind of showcase, a band that was kind of, not in a major city, just kind of doing their thing. And again, that's Hüsker Dü, the song Something I Learned Today from the classic alternative 80s album, Zen Arcade. And let me see, should I throw in one extra bonus jam? I covered Fugazi when I did DC, which included, a member of Minor Threat. This is going to sound so different. You know what? I'm going to stick to what I picked. So the first pick is Chicago, Naked Raygun, the song Treason. Then we got the Cro-Mags in New York City in the mid-'80s, the song Hard Times from the album The Age of Quarrel. Then we got Social Distortion repping the California scene, a different song than I picked a month ago. I picked the song Telling Them when I covered it last time. I'm picking the song Another State of Mind this week. And then for bonus tune, covering the band Hüsker Do from Minnesota. I mean, who's from Minnesota besides like Prince, you know? Not really, you know, a beacon of alternative or punk rock. But just, you know, they were definitely touring with all the punk bands, and they were definitely on the punk label. They were on the same label as Descendants, Black Flag, and, you know, just kind of doing their own thing over in Minnesota. And if they had stayed together another couple years, I think they would have been an alternative radio and been a lot bigger. But hey, that's not what it's all about, you know. It is what it is. Same thing with the Pixies. If they hadn't broken up in early 1992, I think their next album would have been huge, just because everything blew up in 93. Nirvana blew up in 91. And then all the record labels went and signed all these weird alternative bands. A lot of them didn't make it commercially. A lot of them put out a couple major label albums. Maybe got a little play like Screaming Trees, like the Melvins. You know, a lot of people know them, and they had some minor singles, you know, in the mainstream. I just think a band like the Pixies, a band like Hüsker Du probably would have made it. Probably would have had more success if they hadn't broken up when they did. And that's about it, guys. Have a great 3 Tune Tuesday, everybody. And I love y'all. Peace. Later.